But yeah, and as you said, Diane, the topic I'm going to address for you this afternoon is probably a major contributor to stress. And if it's not already, I'm putting money down, it might be in the new year. So let me pull up my slides here and put this show on the road. So the topic is feed prices, COVID, and the supply chain. And I want to look at a few things on a bit broader perspective. And if you hope or think that I might be providing you with any solutions or any forecasts with regards to the new year here, I must apologize. My crystal ball has disappeared on me, and I've lost that ability to give you prices and quantities and other forecasts for this year. But the main motivator when I talked to Brenda Reimer first was like that issue of feed costs. That's clearly the big white elephant in the room here for the industry and all of you. But there's so many other things going on right now that are just compounding this effect. So what's not in the title, because I didn't know it was coming, is the Ukraine crisis. And while we are all horrified about the war that's unfolding there, we have to keep in mind what the ramifications of this will be for global commodity markets. And so price indices are already going up. And I would predict, based on what I know of markets, is that they will continue to go up. I'm talking to a colleague in Brazil later this afternoon, and I have been on the telephone with media people about fertilizer prices and what fertilizer prices might be doing in 2022. And all these evidence suggests they are going to go up like firework rockets. And that is because Russia, which will be banned from any sort of economic activity, is the world's largest exporter of nitrogen fertilizers. Canada is number 3, but there will be a spike just because of the lack of product in the marketplace. So I hope you have your fertilizer tanks all filled up to the rim, or you are locked into contracts that give you favorable access to what product you need in this market. So we take the feed price crisis as it already stands, and we're adding the Ukrainian war and its outcomes, and we're adding to that inflation and the fact that the Bank of Canada raised its benchmark rate by 0.25% today. Doesn't mean that inflation will disappear because of all these other bottlenecks and war and supply chain related issues. I would expect inflation to stay where it is right now and probably going up. This means the pressures you're experiencing on farm and the poultry supply chain experiences overall, I would think, are probably going to intensify, meaning just more stress for the entire industry. I'll try to capture this all here in form of a scale. Like I'm trying to depict the balance between what I think is going on that you should maybe be paying attention to, even if it's not much you can do about it, and therefore it will be increasing your stress. So we have the cost pressures and specifically the feed related pressures on farm on one end of the scale. And on the other side of your supply chain in that scale are the retailers that are finally connecting your beautiful product, your birds, hopefully in a slaughtered fashion or as fillets or drumsticks or whatever you want, with myself and families throughout the country. And that is the consumer side, the retail consumer, the food service consumer. And in the middle of that, I'll place inflation, because inflation will affect all the stakeholders in the industry. And so right now I have the scale down on the cost pressure side, because that seems to be weighing fairly heavily right now, and it will be throughout the year. But that scale could also flip down to the other side, to the retail and consumer side, depending on what Canadians will be doing as we all emerge out of the pandemic. The big question is, are we all going to go be ourselves in 2019 or 2018? Or, as the media has been talking about, will there be a new normal? Don't ask me, I don't know what the new normal will look like, but I have some data to show you of what's happening in 2021, 2022 so far in the poultry market. The topic that I can only raise, and that I think your organization and others will have to talk about, is the confines that the poultry industry cost of production system puts on this issue of rising cost pressures and sort of powerful retailers on the other end. And so I want to talk a little bit about that today before I go on to some consumer topics. To my understanding, there needs to be a delicate process of negotiations between producer groups, their processors, and the big retailers in the country of how is that cost pressure, not just feed, but the entire cost pressure, inflation pressure construct, how is that going, that pain, how is it going to be shared between primary producers, the marketing channel, the processing industry in between, the distributors, the wholesalers, and finally the big retailers? That to me is an open question, and that's why I have sort of put 3 question marks below my big arc arrow here between producers and the retailers. I think there's lots of need for debate, maybe innovation in the supply management system in and of itself to cope with this, at least in the medium term. I don't know how reactive the system can be in the short term. So I want to look at sort of these topics, or these topics along the supply chain, and I've used sort of a standard depiction here. Feed costs are going up. I would say the Ukraine crisis is, through its impact on commodity grain markets directly, is going to elevate the feed cost pressure already. I just looked at the Globe and Mail this morning. I think the oil price, West Texas Intermediate, is at $110, give or take $1. That's going to add to transportation and other logistics costs. It's going to add to production costs. That's going to be reflected in higher input prices that producers are exposed to. And let's not forget container shipping and all sorts of other supply chain issues that we have heard about over the last year and a bit. These supply chain issues may have been mitigated a little bit, but they're not gone. And through inflationary pressures and other things, they probably are here to stay around. So it's maybe right now not a particularly pleasant place to be in a cost of production system, in a regulated cost of production system model, where technically you should take these costs, add them into your cost function, and then renegotiate prices and quantities and everything else with your processors. And I'll have 2 quotes as I go on in my presentation to kind of showcase what the issue with that process is right now and might be in the year to come. The second aspect, and that relates to what's happening in terms of cost pressures on farm, is that the main question in the room is how much of that cost pressure can actually be passed on and to whom? Is it the poultry processing industry that should take responsibility and find ways of mitigating costs between producers and consumers, or food service industry? Or should the retailers be held accountable, and should they adjust their margins to take at least a share of the cost pressure on? Or should we be passing on these costs 100% to Canadian consumers, retail and restaurant and food service consumers, and let them foot the bill? And it's a market fluctuation, so why not expose consumers to that market? I personally, don't have a big problem with paying a little bit more for poultry products, but food security and in the economic ramifications of COVID are not over. There's a lot of people that are underemployed and still unemployed. Can they afford to pay more for chicken breast, a sandwich, or a sliced product? I doubt it, and so that might be a risk and a danger for the entire industry as well. Let's not forget point number 3, the prices that consumers pay in the marketplace are made between processors and retailers, anywhere in there. It's typically not producers that are dictating prices. You know as much as I do that you typically often more on the receiving end with your cost of production system in place, of course, but prices are made here, and we all understand that Canadian retailers are very powerful. They're very concentrated. There's only a few to go to with product on a large scale. And so this is going to be an interesting negotiation process and an interesting bargaining process as sort of this cost crisis unfolds this year. Last but not least, we have consumers. And while we all believe that consumers are more optimistic, unemployment has been reduced, we're coming out of COVID restrictions, the masks are off, restaurants are excited, food services excited, the university is excited, we are all excited, but there's still a lot of question marks out there what demand will do. Will people buy, again, will they revert to 2019 and you can use that year as what 2022 is going to look like, or will it be different? So it's still early in the year, it's March, what is it, March 2nd today? So we don't have any good predictions of what the year will bring. So, sorry, I should have pulled this up earlier. It's a little bit about how are consumers behaving. We know they are a very diverse bunch. And so I'm going to share some results that I have just completed some research on with some colleagues, where we investigate how open poultry or chicken consumers, for that matter, are to changes in the production system on farm by substituting feed ingredients. Maybe we can use this as a case study, substituting feed ingredients in response to, say, feed becoming more expensive, and you're looking to replace more expensive feed ingredient components in your diet with a cheaper option. You all understand better than I do that this has implication for the quality of the product that you're producing. And so we use that sort of as a scenario to ask consumers how much they like this idea of innovation on the feed side of the production system. I'm going to show you some results there, and we'll see how informative that is. Okay, so coming back to the on-farm side, I have two quotes here just to illustrate how tricky this issue of cost of production model, when you have these significant rises in cost, in feed prices and other key elements, and how tricky this might be and sort of in the idea of passing this on to the downstream stage of the marketing channel. So supply management products, particularly poultry processors, have already experienced a reduction in their returns. And they're still adjusting to this new COVID/after COVID market situation. And this was just published by a colleague out of the U of Guelph late in 2021. So this is very hot off the press. The fact that processors are still coping with the ramifications of the COVID crisis and trying to adjust tells us that their ability to take on these additional costs, shrinking their margins and keeping their relationships with the retailers will be limited. So some other solution has to be found. I don't know, but it's something that needs to be discussed in the industry. On the other side of that coin, the ability of consumers to afford higher prices or to be willing to pay higher prices, we should not forget that inflation is around, and that inflation has not manifested itself by poultry products themselves in the fact poultry prices have dropped by and large over the last 2 years, the COVID period. But if you read the second sentence of my quote here, at 4.8%, beef has been the primary driver of meat price inflation over the last 2 years, when the overall inflation has only been 1.8%. So meat proteins, specifically beef, have been a major driver of the past inflation. And poultry has been doing really well, so you can be proud of your industry. But with the increases in grain prices and in other cost pressures, I think that advantage may be eroding, adding to a higher level of overall food price inflation, which in the eyes of consumers will make all meat products, and particularly the ones that are affected by feed grains more. So the poultry industry predominantly as well, consumers may be changing their assessment of poultry prices in this year 2022. Something that I haven't heard about a lot lately, but that I have come across as I prepared for this talk again, is what about food processing labor shortage and cost, which has been a big issue in the last 2 years across the agriculture industry, you know this, but will this issue start to go away in 2022? Will the industry be able to be fully stocked and hire people at reasonable wage levels and reasonable cost levels in 2022 when we talk about poultry? How quickly will the food service industry, which is a big consumer of different kinds of poultry products, how quickly will they rebound now that we have opened food service to its fullest potential again? There seem to be some unmet demand supply kind of imbalance on the wholesale level of the industry. As restaurants close down, wholesalers, retailers, and other suppliers have held product back. And it looks like, from my reading of the latest research evidence, against here from colleague from the U of Guelph, that the poultry wholesale market is still in an imbalance, and there may be frozen product that needs to go out of the door before new orders will be filed with poultry processors to replenish that demand and supply to consumers. And so this may create another bottleneck in the sense of not being able to get as much product out into the marketplace because of high stock levels that have to be worn down before consumers and customers are asking for more production from the farm level. And again, here in this market where we have these imbalances, this will have an impact on prices. If there's an oversupply, which you can't really have in a supply management system, but if there is some sort of stock levels sitting with wholesalers, this may in fact lead to price pressures. And the EMI composite index, which is sort of a measurement of a fixed range of poultry products, indicates that prices for this sort of package of poultry products is artificially low and has been artificially low in 2021, suggesting that poultry prices going to food service and retailers are going to be depressed at least for the first half of 2022, before this sort of stock has been worn down. Okay, so there's lots of things to worry about and to work on, I think. But I want to leave the supply management system and the supply chain behind and now focus a little bit more on the consumer side. So a response to cost pressures, if one of your feed ingredients goes up in price, you ask yourself, you could ask yourself, can I replace this feed ingredient with a cheaper alternative? And so colleagues and I did a study, and I apologize for the text being cut off. I don't want to go out of my presentation and fix it now, but I'll talk you through it. So this paper was recently published in a journal called Food Policy, and it's called Information Effects on Consumer Preferences for Alternative Animal Feedstuffs. And the main question we were asking is, are consumers willing to accept chicken products, as you see in the pictures here, chicken breast products, if these animals, these broilers, have been fed an innovative and new diet that doesn't exist in the marketplace? And what we did, we teamed up with a group of meat scientists, and we had broilers produced with a standard diet, including soy as the main protein component. Then we replaced the soy component with spirulina powder, so blue-green algae powder as the major source of protein in the diet, and another diet that included insect meal, black soldier fly meal, as the main protein component in that broiler diet. And so these chickens were raised in a standard production system in a standard fashion with these three alternative diets. Then they were slaughtered. The chicken breast was packaged using retail conform standard packaging. And then we engaged producers in an experiment where we asked them, would you buy this product and would you buy that product, with different prices and different labels. You see that on the far right bottom, there's a pro-planet, like an environmental label. So we tested different labeling information scenarios and at different price levels. And we did that. We asked them some questions about their social demographics using some surveys and things like that. And then we analyzed this as economists like to do, and we distilled some results from it. And the quick answers are consumers willing to buy chicken products that have been produced with an alternative diet. The straight and quick answer is very likely they're not willing to do that. And the main factor here, and this is something that as an economist, I ventured out into the meat science literature a little bit and got some extra information. The main factor that will prevent consumers from considering such innovative products, and no, you're not talking today about using insect meal or spirulina, but the calorie effects that these new alternative meat ingredients create are not dissimilar from a corn-fed chicken. And so a corn-fed chicken will create a more colorful and more yellow and orange hue type of chicken breast, and so does the spirulina product, and to a lesser extent the insect meal. And so why am I showing you this? Because I feel this is a little bit like a case study of what would happen if you would switch to corn instead of grains or something like that. But at the end of the day is the weird color, the unknown color, the unfamiliar color effect makes most mainstream consumers go, oh no, I don't like this, even if we tell them about these products. And so there's two main results here that I just want to put towards you is the vast majority of 1,200 consumers we engaged in this study were turned off by the different raw meat color and the more yellow, more orange tones of that chicken breast. They didn't know how to interpret this. And even if the price of that product was lower than the product that looked very much familiar to them, They said, no, I don't want to touch this. This looks awkward. I don't want to put this in my mouth or cook it at home. But we found a niche of consumers that are more willing to accept the unfamiliar color and where this color comes from, but only if we really told them, oh, this comes from a different use of a different feed ingredient. And so this is kind of indicative of consumers' unwillingness to consider products that they're not familiar with. And I think we may be able to relate this. When something doesn't look right in the grocery store or in a different context, we're typically walking away from it and we're leaving it alone. So why am I telling you about this? If we are thinking, oh, we switch diets and we switch feed ingredients to offset some of the cost of rising feed prices and other cost pressures, be very careful with this, because consumers may not like the idea of seeing a different chicken or broiler product in this case. And so this just goes to show that quick adjustments in a production system may not likely end up earning the industry brownie points with Canadians and consumers in particular. So that's just a word of caution. And there's a lot of other research by my colleagues in meat science and in other areas that would back up the importance of color and the quality attributes that are sensory in nature and that are hidden between a product when it's fed a different diet. To end kind of my presentation, I have a couple of slides that I gathered from market research reports that are sort of end of 2021 and going into 2022 that I have access to the university. And I went a little bit through these reports. They talk about long and short about what Canadians, and this is all Canadian focused data, what Canadians are really looking for when they go grocery shopping, when they are walking by the fresh meat aisle or the frozen meat aisle for that matter as well. What are they looking for? And so when they were asked, what type of meat do you typically most often eat at home? Good news story, 96% said chicken. And this is Canadian National Representative Survey here with almost 2,000 consumers. Chicken is the #1 meat. And I think that's a message you should all celebrate. Chicken has so many things going for it, even during these difficult times. And I'll look at that in a second, but certainly that is resonating in this high level of purchase potential. Way ahead of beef and also a lot ahead of turkey, but turkey has a special role we all understand. What are people looking for when they're making purchase decisions for meat? And this includes poultry in particular. And I want to just ask you for a second, do you see any item here on this list of important factors that you as producers are not in the business of producing? And I would say, I don't know, when I go down the list, I would maybe larger formats, I don't know even what that really means, so let's leave that out. And grass-fed, I don't know if chickens would be grass-fed, rarely I would think. So maybe grass-fed, but not much. But even the item at the bottom of the list here, appealing to kids. When it comes to meat proteins, I would put money down and would go out and tell everybody who wants to hear it and anybody who wants to hear it that chicken is the most beloved meat protein by kids. Origin you do, natural you do, the product is low in fat, you don't have to deal with too many free-from claims because it's understood to be a really clean product to start with. It's easy to prepare, it's yummy and everything. So despite all the doom and gloom, I would expect that Canadians' response to what they see in the meat aisle and how they evaluate chicken is putting the industry still on a strong footing. So very last slide before my grand thank you. As the economy is not fully up to steam, and meat is one of the more expensive items in the grocery cart these days and has been for a while, of course we see consumers walking away from meat products and eating more veggies and other products. But what you see here, it's predominantly age 55 plus consumers that are having a larger tendency to walk away from the meat aisle. And the reasons for why they're walking away from the meat aisle is they're trying to follow a healthier diet, or they are, but not so much motivated by whatever they perceive to be the environmental implications of animal agriculture. And I think the poultry industry is in a unique position here to turn these misperceptions around. It is the most affordable of the meat proteins. And I think it has, as the previous slide I was trying to emphasize, has a lot of positive things going for it. And so with that, I'd like you to thank you very much for your attention, and I'd love to answer some questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Sven. Lots on the plate there for sure, with all the kinds of things that are going on. You know, interesting on some of those last slides where you talk about what impacts purchasers' decisions. I noticed that origin was the #1 you know, influencer. So is that origin as in terms of them coming from local, or is that origin coming from a certain type of processor? Can you flesh out that origin?
Yeah, the report wasn't 100% clear what they mean by origin, whether that would be sort of, you know, domestic or imported or something like that. I would think that the consumers mean origin as knowing where it's been produced. So the message, this has been produced locally, regionally, in the province or in the country, has a value to consumers. Even if you say, oh, all of it is produced domestically, okay, fine, you know that, but consumers need to be reminded of the fact that it is. That's important.
Now, I've got a question that's popped in here. So you've kind of focused specifically on chicken for the most part. What about turkey meat or eggs? Can you give any shading, I guess, according to either of those?
I can shade over to the turkey a little bit more than the eggs, I must say. But so I talked to the turkey producers yesterday, and I was kind of putting similar messages out to them. Turkey, it's a bit unfortunate. Turkey needs to do more, and I'm not the marketing person to tell you what to do, but Turkey has that persistent image as just being the festive bird. Thanksgiving, Christmas, and I don't know if anybody makes turkey for Easter. I don't. So I think product innovation and consistent messaging alongside of marketing more strongly turkey breast, turkey thighs as an everyday meal option. I grew up in Germany for the first 32 years of my life, and we had turkey much more often at home in Germany back in the day than what I see being offered in the grocery store and what I see people cooking. My mom would buy a larger turkey thigh, and we would bake that in the oven and slice it and eat it with potatoes and veggies and stuff like that on a regular weekday. So I would want turkey producers to go out full force and tell Canadians to drop that association of turkey, of just being a festive bird, and make sure the retail aisle has all these product options available that would entice people to consider turkey, ground, thigh, breast, whatever, for, I don't know, 7 days a week. That seems to be a big factor in turkey marketing.
Or maybe 3 and 3 if we're going to give
sure. And then obviously,
what about eggs? Anything you can throw in on eggs? We'll have to move through because I got about a ton of questions flown in for you.
I'm not prepared for eggs, but if somebody tells me to go back and look through the material, eggs are mentioned, eggs are important, but I'm unprepared to answer. I apologize.
No problem. All right, let's work our way through the questions. Do you think the older age group, less consumption of meat protein, has to do with income as well?
If people are on fixed income and go to the grocery store, they are certainly turned off by the price stickers on the meat aisle, that's for sure. All the diet and health advice would also not steer elderly consumers towards meat protein. I would believe with the right messaging that chicken turkey have the strongest point of being appealing to, let's say, elderly Canadians. But it's certainly that price sticker, especially for the competitors, you know, the pork and the beef, that's driving people away. And the question was stated as meat and not poultry in particular.
Right. Okay. More questions. What trends, if any, have you seen among visible minorities when it comes to preferences and or willingness to pay for chicken, turkey, eggs compared to other proteins, especially post-COVID? Yeah, so very interesting. And I didn't think about making that part of my slides here, but I had it in the back burner, is that especially Chinese/Asian Canadian consumers, and particularly also those of age 55 plus, have high positive preferences for turkey. This is the consumer segment
that looks at turkey quite a bit different than what I would think the average Canadian would see turkey, the festive bird and so on and so on. So there's quite a niche group of Chinese consumers, and particularly the dad's generation, the older generation, that has strong preferences for turkey products. So those thighs that I want to sell to Canadians, and the breasts and so on. Mm-hmm.
Any other minority trends that you spotted, or is that the most obvious one, I guess?
That's the most obvious and the strongest one. There is, it's not minority related, but when you talk about ethnic food, so, and I've seen that on Facebook posts and other things. So recipe ideas, anything that can turn a chicken product or a turkey product into an ethnic dish, spices, flavors of the world, seem to be appealing, particularly coming out of COVID. If you have a turkey taco in your hand, you close your eyes, you're sitting in Mexico at the beach kind of feeling. So that seems to be something, at least the retail end and the food processing side is keen on pursuing, to make these products more appealing to ethnically inclined customers.
All right. How much of a threat to chicken consumption do you perceive to be coming from a trend towards increased plant-based chicken consumption moving forward? And if there is such a threat, which demographic group might it come from?
That's a powerful question. If I had the answers, I'd be super famous. So, the move to plant-based is generally being perceived as a move because motivated by personal health. So I'm want to eat less meat that would, harm my heart health and things like that, whatever people believe. The other group is motivated more by global climate change and environmental concerns, perceived, nothing proven, perceived. If I eat less meat, we can save the planet. I would go out and say that this is by and large this is to a large degree motivated by the beef side, that the messaging around climate change has been mostly anchored around beef production. And that's unfortunate for the beef industry, but I think we probably can agree that these two topics have come together most often. Because chicken and turkey production take place in fairly controlled, very controlled barn-like systems, their footprint and their environmental impacts are much more contained. And you all understand, how you manage your flocks from start to finish, and then you clean out and you sanitize and all the things you do. It's a very controlled environment. So it's much easier to control all these things that people perceive to be possibly negative. And so I would think that the plant-based movement is first and foremost turning into an issue for the most expensive of the meat proteins. I think people will give chicken and turkey directly, both of them, a lot of credit for their smaller footprint, for their proven healthier product attributes in the low fats and all of these things. And that includes the eggs, of course, as well.
And yet we do see some of these plant-based chicken-like products that are still emerging, even if,
they are considered more environmentally friendly.
Having a new competitor could be seen as a threat. Having a new competitor may rethink your marketing message. It doesn't mean that half of all Canadians are going to dump eggs and chicken and turkey tomorrow or on Monday and moving over to whatever innovative product there is. If you look at the price tickets of these innovative products and you look at their price per pound or 100 grams or kilo, whatever it is, please note that they are not always yet cost competitive. And people look at quality, they buy things that are familiar with, they know what it tastes like, and they look at freshness, and nothing beats a fresh piece of meat. I'm going to buy some of these alternatives just because I want to try. I'm open with you, but they are not always the close substitutes we feel that they are.
That's right. Okay. Now, to what extent should supply managed commodities not follow true cost of production with these increased costs? So if costs aren't covered over a long period of time, then we will not be addressing one of the pillars of supply management. So the percentage of retail cost, that's what the producer receives, is very low. So talk a little bit about that aspect of it. the production.
Okay, I need to put a disclaimer out there. You know, me, Sven, coming from Germany, having been here for 15 years, I mostly have steered clear of anything supply management. My colleagues know that, because I thought I want to be nice. I don't want to get into trouble. Okay, so you have your cost of production model, and I by no means did I say, you know, abandon supply management and cost of production model, but the way it's designed right now, and in this environment that we'll have to live through right now, it's probably adding added stress factors. So 3 scenarios. Costs are passed on as they have been, 100 to whatever formula you have with your processors, and you say let the processors worry about it. I showed you evidence that their margins are already in a precarious situation. Their ability to communicate to the Loblaws, the Sobeys, and the Save on Foods of this world to say, why don't you share some of this cost pressure with us on behalf of the supply management system? I probably could give you the answer right here. They will not be very enthused about that proposition. They are fiercely protecting their margin wherever, and you know that wherever they can. Okay, so that might not be viable. I wonder myself openly, can there be an adjustment to the formula that would share the burden more, not equally, but that would share the burden to some degree between all producers, the processors, and maybe even trying to sit down with the retailers and saying, look, you know, we are doing a lot for you. Can you do something for us? Because there is not much of an alternative source that the retailers could get their chicken and turkey and eggs from. It's either from Canadian producers, or they need to go to Ottawa and say, oh, we would like to import these products, but we all understand that's not on the table here, right? And that's ludicrous. So can this be done? Or you say, okay, producers, you have to stick with these artificial cost increases. We're sticking with the averages that we have been using for the last previous years, and good luck to you. And I think that would probably be the worst outcome, because you're hitting the weakest group in the supply chain the hardest, and then you wonder why farmers are, you know, stressed extremely, and why people are leaving the industry, because they say if there's no money to be made, you know, I'm not a hobby farmer, this is my business. That's clearly not viable, and nobody wins from that as well. So I think big table, big discussion, and negotiations is what I would think is the most sensible outcome here.
Right. Well, it's sort of along that line then. Rob is asking, you know, the broiler industry is faced with these rising costs from energy, feed, and of course, chick costs. But are there examples from any other sectors about how such costs are passed along through the processor and consumer when there's resistance to price increases? If that's the environment we're heading into, are there any other places we can look to for how those costs are passed along?
Well, in other non-supply management industries, everything takes place based on contracting. And so retailers typically go out to the larger processors and they set up long-term supply agreements, and then the processors typically source producers to fill their capacities. Supply management does not have that flexibility. And I think so the solutions you would find in the pork industry, in the beef industry, and in any other agricultural commodity area, I think are not really at the disposal of the supply management industries here. I yet have to understand how flexible, maybe in the short term, you could make the regulation that backs up the system. If there's room for flexibility, I would think now is the time to use that, because I'm afraid about it. I think the industry has not yet seen the brunt of what might be coming down the pipeline this year in terms of cost. I'm really eager to hear what my colleague in Brazil has to say about the fertilizer situation. This could be another storm of some kind or other, and then weather prognoses for 2022 are not exactly particularly good as well. So everything seems to be pointing in the wrong direction these days.
Yeah, if ever there's a time to test the flexibility or elasticity of the formula, now is the time. Okay, one more question here. I think we can sneak in before coffee break. When red meat prices increase, often people will shift to chicken as a protein replacement. But what are people going to shift to if chicken gets more expensive when it's already known as one of the most efficient options?
So that's a great question. This has lots of economics angle and twist to it. So remember
which is
that,
what you economists love.
we spend all day and night on these kinds of challenges. So yes, your animal's diet is very much dependent on grain prices and other feed ingredients. But last time I checked on the diets that finishing pigs and the little piglets eat as well, there's also quite a bit of grains, and there's some soybeans and some other stuff in there, right? Well, cows, we like to believe they eat a lot of grass, but when they go to the feedlot, they also eat a lot of grain. So broiler, turkeys, laying hens, yes, large effect. Piggies, maybe medium effect. And I would even say medium effect for the beef sector. So I think the good thing is the relative price relation, chicken, turkey, pork, beef, they all will go up in tandem here. I want to say, I don't want to say the ratios, the differentials stay fixed necessarily. Maybe broiler chickens are edging up more than others, but I think they will still remain the cheaper option. And that is also thanks to the high efficiency of the production system. What you put in and what comes out at the end. I mean, not the end, but the product end, of course. So I think that will stay intact.
And I guess the other one, just going back to your slides showing the color differences, it's so interesting because, while consumers say they care about what producers do, I don't know that they really are realizing that maybe we feed them soy or whatever. So you wouldn't think it would matter to them if we switched ingredients, except for that color. Were you surprised at that?
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised at that too, but I remember the first time I went to a grocery store in Mexico, and Mexicans like the corn-fed chicken with the yellow fat, and I thought, like, who painted this chicken breast orange? Because it turns orange, and many of you will know that, or all of you will know that better than I do. So that effect is just that, oh, that's different. And I'm not talking about, people that work in the poultry industry and know the ins and outs of that. They will say, oh, I know where this comes from, give it to me, it's no problem. But the other 36.5 million Canadians that have no background knowledge, don't know what agriculture really does, only look at the price sticker, and if it's cheap, and if it says chicken, well then, they have a very narrow view of what the product should be. And if it doesn't fit into that box, they do not have the capacity to say, oh, yeah, I remember, if you use a different feed ingredient, the quality will change a little bit. When you feed chickens a diet that includes insects or insects meal, the meat actually develops, when I tried it, a little bit of a nutty, more interesting, more intense flavor. Well, you feed that to people that like the chicken the way it is now, they may not agree with me. And so I think there's more risk factors in losing consumer demand than there is advantage of saving a cent or two here and there. And it's a research study. It's not meant to be representative for the industry, but just I thought as a food for thought, because people talk about I think the broiler chicken industry or the laying hens would be one of the first to consider employing alternative feed ingredients if they were economically viable. But this seems to be more than just economically viable. This seems to be, will it find acceptance? Yeah.
Yeah, perception. Yeah. Unless they can market the environmental angle, and then you don't know how far that goes, or the health food angle. Because I heard a recent presentation on algae as a superfood and the high level of proteins, unless they could go after that angle. But again, I think consumer perceptions are a little slower to change for some of those things.
Oh, they're extremely slow. Everybody, I invite you to think about your own shopping habits and what you do. We are incredibly habitual. Most people, to be honest, I think could go through their grocery store that they know with eyes closed, and they would exactly know where their products are. Think about that, and then think about people's willingness to change just because we tell them they should. It's a weak proposition.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, very interesting discussion. Thank you for all your questions.